won the Revolutionary War?
I don't even know what that war is, to be honest.
Do you know who the leader of Russia is?
I forgot his name.
Do you know what the First Amendment is?
My history teacher will be disappointed in me. No.
What two countries border the U.S.?
I really don't know. I don't know.
The country above us and below us. Like, if you had to guess.
What, Africa?
Can you name 3 countries in North America?
North America.
You know this.
I do.
Do you know what the 4 directions on a compass are?
A compass? What is that?
Legislative, executive, and...
Congress, the Senate, and the other one.
How many Supreme Court justices are there?
Ooh. 6? 7. 6 or 7.
Can you name your U.S. senators?
No. I think it's Dwayne Johnson. The Rock? The Rock?
Well, welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, political illiteracy. We're going to discuss understanding a democracy, a republic, and a theocracy. What are the differences? You know, in September of 1787, as delegates were leaving Independence Hall in Philadelphia, there was a woman named Elizabeth Powell who approached Benjamin Franklin, and she asked him this very simple and very direct question. She said, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? Well, Franklin didn't give her a flowery speech. He didn't talk about hopes and dreams. He looked at her and said, a republic, if you can keep it. So he wasn't being cryptic. He was being honest. He knew that the hardest part wasn't designing the government. It was ensuring the people actually understood the machine that they were operating. Today, we've lost that understanding. We use words like democracy, theocracy, republic as if they're interchangeable labels. But they're entirely different engines. And if you put the wrong fuel in the wrong engine, the entire thing may blow up. So today we're going back to the blueprints. No myths, no legends, just the facts of how these systems actually work. Because we can't keep what we don't understand. You know, as my husband and I traveled throughout the state on his campaign as he runs for Georgia's Secretary of State, we are often surprised by the lack of understanding that exists. Is it our school system's fault? Is it the lack of parental teaching? Or maybe they wish that we were just a different type of government altogether. But either way, we're certainly living in a crisis. But who will be hurt the most? As a millennial, I understand that it's not going to be my parents' generation that hurts the most. It's going to be our elderly years that will suffer. All of the millennials that are using their youthful energy to change the government that's not going to change, instead of maintaining it, will use their older years wondering, what did I do? So I want to talk to parents and I want to talk to grandparents for a quick second. There's a lot of time that's been spent on the kind of world we want to leave behind. That tends to be the focus. What do we leave behind for our grandkids, for our children? The debt, the lack of traditional values, the economy and job market. But there's a silent debt that we are passing down that is far more dangerous, and that's political illiteracy. If we don't teach the next generation the difference between a democracy, a republic, and a theocracy, we aren't just leaving them a house with a cracked foundation. We're leaving them a house that they don't know how to maintain. And eventually, they're going to burn it down so they can stay warm. When we tell our kids that we live in a pure democracy, We are teaching them that the majority is always right. We are teaching them that if they can get 51% of their friends to agree on something, they have a moral right to impose that on the other 49%. That sounds like fairness to a child, but it's actually the blueprint for mob rule. If they don't understand that they live in a republic, a system specifically designed to protect individuals from the crowd, they won't value the Bill of Rights. They'll see the Constitution as not as a shield, but they'll see it as an obstacle to their feelings of the moment. And a generation that views the law as an obstacle is a generation that will eventually dismantle it. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that particularly when it comes to progressives. They are fighting extremely hard to dismantle our republic. And on the flip side, we see people pushing for what is essentially a theocracy without even realizing it. They want the government to enforce their specific moral or spiritual vision on everyone else. But you cannot legislate the heart. You cannot force people to worship God. And as a Christian and a conservative, I want to see every soul saved. But my common sense tells me that a theocracy is the fastest way to destroy the very faith that we love. When you fuse the pulpit with the state in this way, you aren't sanctifying the government. You're politicizing the gospel. Real faith requires a free will response to the Holy Spirit, not a mandate from a magistrate. So oftentimes when we think of a theocracy, we think of a Muslim country. But we have to be careful that we also pay attention to whether or not we are imposing on free will. You see, a theocracy doesn't create converts. It creates hypocrites who follow the rules out of the fear of the state rather than the love for their Lord. By forcing righteousness through the law, we rob the gospel of its power. And we turn the mission of the church into a cold exercise of government intimidation. Furthermore, we must apply the logic of the wrong hands. If you build a system that gives the government the power to enforce your religious views today, you are handing them the keys to enforce someone else's views tomorrow. The logic of the wrong hands. It's in your hand today, but tomorrow it may be in the wrong hands. I believe that the most detrimental part of this ignorance is that it turns our children into passengers in their own country. And if you don't know how the machine works, you can't fix it when it breaks. You just sit in the back seat, scream at the driver, or you'll cancel the driver and post ugly messages on social media. These are the same people that get angry at the Supreme Court ruling because they don't understand jurisdiction. They'll get frustrated with the Senate because they don't understand representation. They'll give up on voting because they are never taught the Jethro principle of local accountability. In other words, that's something that's connected to the Bible, but it's basically saying that they're not understanding the hierarchy that's associated with accountability, the hierarchy of power, the structural hierarchy. So we have to stop treating civics like a boring history elective and start seeing it as survival training, because this country depends on it. If we want for the people to actually mean something 20 years from now, we have to teach people how to be answerable. We have to teach them that the republic is a heavy burden. It requires logic. It requires patience. It requires an understanding that you don't always get your way just because you're allowed or because you're in the majority. So I'm going to take all of us kitchen table debaters on a little bit of a journey so that when we walk away from this podcast, from this radio show, however you're listening, you are fully recognizing the difference between these systems and why we are a republic, a constitutional republic right here in America. Then I'm going to close the show with my thoughts on why it seems like as a people, we are more divided than ever. What's going on? Well, we're going to talk about all that and more after the break. Don't leave the table. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3.
The left is siding with illegals, attacking ICE, and fighting to let non-citizens vote. Republican Kelvin King is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, Air Force veteran, and conservative businessman. As Georgia's Secretary of State, Kelvin will put Americans first, root out corruption, clean up voter rolls, and restore confidence in our elections. The other candidates had their chance and failed. Republican Kelvin King for Secretary of State, leadership Georgia voters can trust.
Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, political illiteracy, understanding a democracy, a republic, and a theocracy. As I stated before, I opened up with a quote or a statement that was made by Benjamin Franklin when he was speaking with Elizabeth Powell, who asked whether or not we were a monarchy or a republic. And he said, "We are a republic if you can keep it." But the hard truth is that you can't keep what you don't understand. And as I stated before, as a millennial, I see us living through a crisis of political illiteracy, where we've mistaken a pure democracy for fairness, not realizing that majority rule without constitutional guardrails is simply a blueprint for mob rule. And this ignorance turns our children into these passengers who scream at the driver because they don't understand the mechanics or the jurisdiction or the representation, eventually leading them to view the law as an obstacle to be dismantled rather than a shield to be protected. So whether it's the impulse towards theocracy, which only serves to politicize the gospel and create hypocrites through intimidation, or it's the encroachment of this new communism from within, we are all handing the next generation a house they don't know how to maintain. And we really have to stop treating civics like a boring elective and start treating it like the survival training it is. Because if we want a government that is truly answerable to the people, we have to teach the people the right questions. So I want to look at the mechanics of these systems, starting with the system that is often interchanged with the republic. I cannot tell you the amount of times I'm either on a panel, on a podcast, or an interview, and I hear someone say, "Well, this is a democracy." And I'm like, no, it's not. So let's talk about a democracy. So in its purest form, it is built on the will of the people. And it sounds perfect on paper. But historical logic tells us that a pure democracy is really just majority rules. As I stated before, if 51% of the people decide the other 49% shouldn't have property rights, that's a democracy in action. It's a system driven by the immediate temperature in the room. But it's also extremely volatile because it lacks a permanent anchor. History is a graveyard of failed democracies. And if we don't wake up, we're going to find ourselves at the head of the funeral procession. The common sense reason why pure democracies fail is simple. The appetite of the majority eventually outpaces the resources of the minority. It's that simple. Perfect example of this is universal health care. There's a majority of people who want universal health care. They don't think that they should have to pay for health care. However, they're not asking the 1 million doctors that have to treat and is already treating 60 million Medicaid recipients. So you have 1 million doctors treating 60 million or more Medicaid recipients, that averages out to about 10 minutes with your doctor when you go to see he or she. So clearly, this is a perfect example of the majority eventually outpacing the resources of the minority. They can't hire enough nurses and doctors to treat the number of people who are receiving some form of government assistance with their health care. You know, a democracy is essentially two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. It works great for the wolves until the food runs out. And then the system has to turn on itself. And when a government is driven purely by the will of the people, without the anchor of a fixed law, it becomes a slave to the mood of the moment. It trades long-term stability for short-term outrage. And that is a recipe for bankruptcy, both financially as well as morally. The greatest danger we face today is the quiet, persistent effort to move our republic into a democracy. People think that they're expanding freedom, but they're actually removing the load-bearing walls on the house. A republic is designed to be a little bit slower. It's designed to force us to use logic and compromise to protect the individual from the mob. But when you bypass the Electoral College, ignoring the Senate structure, when you try to rule by popular whim, you aren't fixing the system. Now, if we transition it to a pure democracy, we lose the Bill of Rights, because rights cannot exist if 51% of your neighbors can vote them away on a Tuesday afternoon. So that leads me into a theocracy. This is a system where the government and the altar are one and the same. The laws aren't debated in a town hall. They are dictated by a divine authority as interpreted by those in power. Think less of the president and more of the Pope. It provides a very clear moral compass for those within the faith, but for everyone else, there is just no recourse. Logic is replaced by dogma. You don't understand with a theocracy. You don't negotiate. You either conform or you leave. So while a democracy may fail because of the appetites of the mob, a theocracy fails because of the arrogance of men. The danger of trying to move our republic towards a theocratic model or a democracy model is that you aren't actually putting God in charge. You're putting a politician in charge who claims to seek for him. The history is clear. Whenever the church and the state become one in this way, the church is always the one that gets corrupted. There is a place for faith in politics, but it should be guiding the decisions of leaders rather than removing the free will of the people. So when you give a human being the power to enforce divine law with the hand of the police, you remove the logic of the debate and replace it with the finality of doctrine. You also can't negotiate with someone who said their policy came directly from God. You can only submit or rebel. And this destroys the common sense foundation of a republic, which relies on citizens using reason and law to resolve their differences. So the real danger for us as people of faith is that theocracy replaces the Holy Spirit with government oppression. And you cannot legislate the heart for Christ. And when you try, you create a society of resentment and hypocrisy. And if we allow the state to become the arbiters of our spiritual lives, we are building a weapon that will eventually turn against us. So logic dictates that the same power used to enforce your prayers today can be used to ban them tomorrow when the wrong person takes the seat of power. A government that is powerful enough to mandate your religion is powerful enough to dismantle it. We don't need a theocracy to be a moral people. We need a republic to remain a free people. And finally, that leads me to republic. This is what Franklin was talking about. In a republic, the person hold the power. No. In a republic, the people hold the power. But they exercise it through representatives who are bound by a fixed set of rules. The genius of a republic is that it recognizes that the majority isn't always right. It's designed to protect the individual from mob rule. It's purposely slow and full of checks and balances to make sure we don't make permanent mistakes based on temporary emotions. You know, debate is a regular part of a republic because everyone has a voice, not just the majority. So I want to speak to those who have been told that the system is your enemy. Whether you're struggling to make ends meet or you've spent your life feeling like a minority in the room, I want you to hear this. A republic is the only system ever designed to be your shield. In a pure democracy, if you are a minority, whether by race, by belief, or by income, you are at the mercy of the crowd. And if the majority decides that they don't like how you live or how you earn, you're finished. But in a republic, the law is higher than the mob. A republic doesn't care if you have $10 or $10 million. $10 or $10 million. It doesn't care what you look like. It only cares what the Constitution says. It is the only system that stops the powerful from simply voting away the rights of the powerless. The strongest argument for a republic is that it is built on human logic and not human perfection. Our founders knew that. They knew that all people are prone to greed and emotions and outbursts. That's why they built a system of checks and balances that forces the government to move slowly and deliberately. It protects the poor man's property from the rich man's influence. And it protects the minority's voice from the majority's voice. So while a theocracy demands your soul, a democracy demands your community, a republic only demands your lawlessness. Just be lawless. It provides a neutral playing field where your success is limited only by your drive, not by the whim of a dictator or the mood of the mob. It's the great equalizer because it puts the crown on the law and not on the man or woman. That is the heritage we are tasked with keeping, not just for our own sake, but for every person who wants to live in a world where their rights are inherent, not granted by a vote.
Well, because we have to define our concepts clearly. A democracy in the political meaning of the word, the original meaning, defining a specific political system, means a country governed by unlimited majority rule. A democracy is a form of government in which the majority has the right to vote on anything and to pass any laws they see fit, the sole standard of legality being a majority vote, that is counting of numbers. Democracy is incompatible with the Constitution because the principle there is that the sole standard of right or wrong in politics is a counting of noses, a majority rule. The best example of that system are the original city-states of Greece, where, if you remember, the majority had the right to vote a death sentence for a man if they disapproved of his ideas. And Socrates is the best example, most famous one, of what is wrong with the system of democracy. Socrates was condemned to death because the majority of the citizens found that his ideas were subversive to the use of Athens. And he refused to escape, though he had a chance. He declared that his fellow citizens were wrong in their decision, but they had the right to vote away his life, which is a ghastly example of the sanction of the victim and a perfect example of the nature of a democracy as a political system of government. Now, a republic, properly, is a system of government which is limited by the individual rights of man, which means that the majority may vote, but only in a strictly limited and defined political sphere, and that the individual rights of man are not subject to majority vote, not to government legislation. All that the government can and should do in regard to rights is protect them, but government cannot infringe them. That is, in essence, the nature of a proper republic.
Here's the common sense reality we have to face. There is no such thing as a perfect government because there's no such thing as perfect people. But there is no system that can sustain itself. But if we are all under a government, whether you agree or not, we should all be united around that system. But unfortunately, that is not the case. We are more divided than ever. Some believe that it's because of the threat of communism or the subtle, in some cases, not so subtle glimpses of socialism. Others believe that it's because we have corrupt politicians. And I think all of those may be true and can be true. And I wouldn't say they're not true, but I believe that there is an underlining element that isn't being talked about until now. So after the break, we're going to close the show with why I believe we are seeing this great divide. We're almost done. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table.
The left is siding with illegals, attacking ICE, and fighting to let non-citizens vote. Republican Kelvin King is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, Air Force veteran, and conservative businessman. As Georgia's Secretary of State, Kelvin will put Americans first, root out corruption, clean up voter rolls, and restore confidence in our elections. The other candidates had their chance and failed. Republican Kelvin King for Secretary of State, leadership Georgia voters can trust.
Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned for family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And if you have missed the show, don't worry. You can go to YouTube as soon as you finish listening to this radio show and watch it from the beginning. Or the encore episode will air tomorrow at 9 a.m. right here on Extra 106.3. Or you can go to our podcast park where I am stationed or wherever you get your podcast. Just search the Janelle King Show. So today's table topic, political illiteracy. Understanding a democracy, a republic, and a theocracy. Now, I opened this segment reminding you that Benjamin Franklin gave us a republic if we can keep it. But the logic is simple. You cannot keep what you do not understand. Today, we are living through a crisis of political illiteracy, where we've mistaken the volatility of pure democracy for fairness, not realizing that a system driven by the temperature in the room is just a blueprint for mob rule, and eventually it'll bankrupt us all, both financially and morally. We've seen that while theocracy fails through the arrogance of men who try to replace the Holy Spirit with the government, with government intimidation, or like we see happening in Iran, replace it with their idea of what leadership and government should be based on the Islamic faith. A republic stands as the great equalizer because it puts the crown on the law rather than the man, protecting the individual, the minority, and the powerless from the whims of the crowds. But this isn't a boring history elective. It's a survival training for a generation of millennials and young people behind us and beyond who are currently being turned into passengers in their own countries, screaming at the driver every other day, either via social media or whatever, because they don't understand. If we want a government that is truly for the people 20 years from now, we have to stop treating the Constitution as an obstacle to our feelings and start treating it as a shield that it was designed to be. We have to teach the next generation how to be answerable and how to maintain this house before they burn it down to stay warm. We've looked at the blueprints. We've identified the engines. And now we have to face common sense reality. There is no perfect system because there are no perfect people. But there is no system that can sustain itself without a united understanding of the law. So I'm closing the show with the real reason why we are seeing, or that I believe we are seeing, a great divide in this country. And it's a truth that goes far deeper than the threats of communism and corrupt politicians. While I do believe that that's there, I believe it is because we have a generation of voters who believe that a republic isn't real. Or they just simply want to treat it like a democracy. They want to ignore the fact that we're not a democracy, but treat us like a democracy. I remember being on a Democrat panel, and I mentioned that we are not a democracy in that discussion. There was a young woman in the audience who came up to me and said this was the first time that she had heard that we were not a democracy. That's right, a college-educated young woman who looked to be probably in her late 20s had never heard that we have never heard that we are a republic. She said she looked it up and that I was right. I know. But I was a bit shocked, but also happy that she looked it up rather than just ignoring me. But I was shocked to see that she had no clue. I believe above all, we have a crisis on our hands because we have a large group of voters who believe that we live in a democracy. That's why they don't understand why we are not falling in line with the majority. This is also why we have so many people running around stating their pronouns as if we can't clearly see what you are. But too many people are fighting to be in the majority rather than having their own voice. The danger of acting like we are living in a pure democracy when we are actually in a republic is that we begin to mistake the will of the majority for the ultimate moral authority. In a democracy, your rights are subjected to a head count. If 51% of the people decide your property, your speech, your business are inconveniencing them, those things can be voted away in an afternoon. By treating our system like this simple popularity contest, we encourage a generation to view the Constitution and the slow, deliberate checks and balances process that we provide, not as a protective shield, but as an annoying obstacle to their immediate feelings. This democracy-first mindset creates a volatile environment where the law is replaced by the mood of the mob, eventually leading to a system where the minority is left with no recourse and the individual is left with no protection. The greatest threat to our stability isn't just the system we have, but it's the mindset of the people that we put in charge. When we elect leaders with a democracy mindset, we are hiring people who view the Constitution as a suggestion rather than a mandate. They believe that 51% of the votes gives them a blank check to override the governor, to override the law and silence the minority. So in opposition, when we elect those who with a theocratic mindset, we are empowering individuals who intend to replace the logic of the constitutional debate with the finality of their own personal doctrine, essentially turning the government into a weapon for spiritual control. The detriment is catastrophic. You end up with representatives who don't want to keep the republic, but rather want to dismantle it and serve their own immediate sense of righteousness or power. These leaders don't respect the slow, deliberate friction of checks and balances. They see them as inconveniences. By putting people in office who don't understand or respect the blueprint of a republic, we are essentially hiring contractors who hate the foundation of the house that they're supposed to be fixing. Eventually, they will stop trying to maintain the structure and start trying to rebuild it in their own image, leaving the rest of us with a government that is no longer answerable to the law, but only to the person holding the gavel. That's a problem. And that's what I see happening. We have people who believe that the seat is theirs. We have people who believe that once they're elected, they now have all the control. They now have all the power. They're not answerable to the people. Once you get elected, you should feel the most control that you've ever felt in your life, because now you're being controlled by those who put you there. That's what's supposed to happen. And people are relying on you. They believe you when you run around and campaign to tell people that you are going to do this and going to do that and that you are going to be a representative of the people. Folks believe that. So when you change it up on them, it's a problem. And then you spend every waking moment doing your best to maintain a system that you did not create, a system that you are a part of, a system that is not yours. Then you spend all of your time trying to maintain a seat that you didn't create, that is not yours, but is there for you to sit in for a short while. But here's the thing. Every system has a cost. In a pure democracy, you trade individual security for a direct voice. In a theocracy, you trade your personal liberty for the collective religious order. In a republic, we trade speed for stability. We have to be mature enough to accept those trade-offs. And if you want to see change, you have to use the right lever for the system that you are in. In a democracy, you must win the heart of the crowd. In a theocracy, you must change the interpretation of the faith. But in a republic, the one we are tasked with keeping and maintaining, you change the things through a slow, disciplined work of the law, through the ballot box, and through local representation. That's why our elections can never be up for debate. We have to maintain control of our own elections. Don't just be a passenger in this country. Learn the mechanics. Know the difference between the noise and the substance. And do your duty. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.
The maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think the communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us.
Well,
I don't even trust you to do that.